Yochai. That's Joey Newcomb singing about Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai, who is celebrated, a sage of the Talmud, celebrated around Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, when we count the Omer. And today in our class, we'll be talking a little bit about the Omer offering, which is brought on the second day of the festival of Matzah during Passover. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? Let's light up the darkness. Who is going to be with us as we're getting it going on a Wednesday night? You know why Wednesdays are great? Because it's almost Shabbos. We can already say good Shabbos. You can really say that any day, but certainly from Wednesday forward. Who's getting together with us as we're doing a little learning on a fine Wednesday night? James Roth in Indianapolis, Stephen in Dover, New Hampshire, Paula in Chicago, Melissa in Great Neck, Sue Strauss in the house from Chicago, Jim with us from Cape Coral, Florida, Fred from Miami Beach, Chaim from Charlotte, Nancy, North Carolina. David Knox says, this channel rules. As a guy, it makes me so happy to learn more. What a beautiful thing to say. Welcome, David. Penina says, Erev Tov, good evening, and shalom from New York. Shalom from Mississippi, says Hannah. Fred says stupendous. Renee says shalom. Lucy's with us from Minnesota. Christo from Lubbock, Texas. To answer the question, it might depend on the cake. The title of today's show, Can We Trust a Man with Cake in His Hand? We shall see. Janice says, shalom, it's almost Shabbos. Ann with us from Merced, California. David is in Long Beach. And Fred also says, I love this channel and we love having you guys here. It's great that you are here. Over on the YouTube side, Marjorie Holler, welcome. It's great to have you with us from Tucker, Georgia. And Shira Diaz says shalom from Dallas, Texas. Welcome, welcome. Nina will put the link in the comments. This is our big month in terms of fundraising. It's our annual campaign. We really hope that everyone for whom this show, the daily show, is special, will be part of the campaign. Remember, when you donate to our nonprofit, you partner with us in lighting up the nations with the wisdom, with Jewish wisdom, with Torah, with this ancient and authentic wisdom. It's a great merit to you in this world and the next when you help us promulgate sharing Torah around the world. If you go to that link, donate.accidentaltalmudist.org, you'll also see a short video that really shows what we've been doing in the last year. I mean, when we watched it, we were moved because it's just, you know, we do so much and you lose track of it from day to day. But everything that we do is made possible by you, by the audience, the people who love this, learning Torah with us, sharing the Torah that they've learned, promoting what we do by donating to the nonprofit to help us reach more people with this valuable and righteous teachings that help people lead more righteous lives. Tonight's class is dedicated, by Claude Nessis for the healing of Marcia S. in Long Island, New York. May she have a refuah shlema, a complete healing of mind, body, spirit, and may her healing not only complete, but speedy. And we say amen. Also, tonight's class dedicated by Bella Rubin in memory of her husband, Boris Rubin. May his memory always be for a blessing. May his soul be bound up in the bonds of eternal life. When we learn in the name of somebody who has left this world, it's one of the few things that we can do that is actually a service to them, right? When we return to the world of souls, we can no longer perform mitzvahs. But when people perform mitzvahs in our honor, when somebody learns Torah or enables others to learn Torah in this world in the name of someone in the world of souls, it gives them a little boost in their journey in the world of souls. We thank you, Bella Rubin, for dedicating tonight's class in memory of your husband, Boris Rubin. May his memory always be for a blessing. Also, to answer a quick question, I shared the other day that as we learned, when somebody is engaged in the performance of a mitzvah, fulfilling a commandment, Jews have 613 commandments, but all people have 7 commandments, the Noahide commandments. And when you're in the process of performing God's will, of doing one of the commandments, or on your way to do a commandment, then we have a tradition that you have an extra measure of protection. You're not going to be protected if you take foolish risks with your life, right? You're not going to be protected even though you're on your way to do a mitzvah if you just step, into the street through a red light. But as long as you're taking proper care of yourself, well, things can happen to anyone at any time. But our sages teach that you have an extra measure of protection when you're involved in doing a mitzvah. So when a loved one, a friend, goes on a journey, we give them a little bit of money to give to someone when they get to their destination, somebody who's needy, right? That they should give $1 to a homeless person or to somebody who's hungry, etc. And because they are engaged in delivering this small amount of charity money from us to the needy person at their destination, they get this extra measure of protection while they're traveling. And of course, there's always a little extra danger when we're traveling, perhaps all the more so these days. So if you know somebody who's traveling, you might give them $1 that they will give to someone when they get to their destination. And I showed that the other day, that we fold it a special way so that when that $1's sitting in their wallet or in their pocket or in their purse, when they see it, they're like, oh yeah, they can't forget, right? Because they have to fulfill their agency. You appointed them your agent to deliver the money, and they have to finish that job. And so they might, if they just stick the $1 in along with their other money, it might get lost. So we fold it special so that they'll be reminded. And how do we do that? You can fold it any way you want. Some people make triangles. What I like is so that the one shows. So what I like to do when I give somebody a mitzvah $1, right, a shliach $1, a shliach is an agent, an emissary. So I'm going to make somebody my emissary to deliver charity. So I fold it over like this at the top, so it still says, in God we trust, and one, echad, right? God is one. And then I fold the bottom so that the one is still showing like that. All right, so you kind of fold it in thirds the long way with the in God we trust and one still showing. And then you just fold the back like this so that, again, the one is still showing. And then you fold the other side so that the one is still showing. And then here's a little bit of a trick. You kind of fold over a little corner back here, just a little bit, so that you can tuck it in there. All right, like that. You tuck it in like that, see? And then it just stays that way, right? It's stable. And, anybody who sees that one folded $1 in their wallet or in their pocket or their purse is going to remember, oh, yeah, Sal gave me this $1 to give to charity at my destination. And then they're going to have to, they may have to go out of their way. They traveled, they landed at the airport, they got to the hotel, they went upstairs, then they find the $1 like, ooh, I got to finish my agency. They'll go downstairs and find a homeless person or someone that some charity that they can give the $1 to, and receive that extra measure of protection. And as we learned a few nights ago when we covered this, you get that protection not only when you go on your way to do the mitzvah, but also as you return. So it's an extra measure of protection for the traveler. All right. Tonight's daf is quite interesting. We're going to be learning about Rabbi Yehuda's approach to passing laws in situations where he thinks that people need a little extra help, right? And so he's going to disagree with the rabbis who dispute him in this ruling, and basically what they're disagreeing about, and then we're going to see if their ruling is consistent with other rulings where they have similar disagreements. And it's a question of, how much help do people need? How careful are people to avoid, coming to make a transgression on their own? Or are we going to decree? Are we going to make a fence around the Torah to protect them from coming close to that edge? So where are we? This is Daf Yud Aleph, page 11 of Tractate Pesachim, the fourth volume of the Talmud. We're in chapter 1. We're completing our discussion of the third Mishnah, Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 1, and we'll open our discussion of the fourth Mishnah. So the third Mishnah, as we saw yesterday, let me just get this over here in front of me. Okay, so the third Mishnah was all about we're still talking about the search for leaven on the eve of Passover, right? The night before, Passover begins on the 15th, the night of the 15th of Nisan. We search for chametz, for leavened bread, leavened products. That's why I mentioned cake. Cake also, unless it's made from Passover meal, you can't eat regular cake during the festival of Passover. So you're searching out the chametz in our homes. And Rabbi Yehuda says in our Mishnah that, well, you can search for it on the night of the 14th. All Hebrew dates begin on the night before in the calendar. And you can search on the morning of the 14th. And you can search up until the time where you need to remove, i.e. destroy the leaven, or remove it from your possession. And then according to Rabbi Yehuda, you cannot search for it anymore. The time for searching has passed. Once the leaven becomes prohibited to eat, which happens, it kicks in, that prohibition kicks in before Passover begins. It kicks in on the afternoon of the 14th of Nisan. That night, we have the Seder. We celebrate the Passover. In the afternoon is when we slaughter the Paschal offering, the Passover offering, the lamb or the kid, when the temple is standing. And once we're slaughtering that animal to roast and eat that night, we can no longer eat chametz, no more eating bread or leavened products. The rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda say that if for some reason you were unable or forgot to search your home for leaven on the 14th, you can still search after that prohibition kicks in. You can still search after the holiday begins. And you can even search during the middle days of the holiday and even after the holiday is over a week later, because any chametz that was in your possession during Passover was something that was prohibited for you to own. It became prohibited and it doesn't become permitted again after the holiday. So even if you forgot to search during all of Passover, after Passover, you should search it out and destroy it, because those things are not for you to possess. So the rabbis say you can search even after the chametz became prohibited and even after the holiday began and then passed. But Rabbi Yehuda says you can only do the search before the holiday begins and before the chametz becomes prohibited to us. So the question is, my benehu, what is between them? What are they actually disagreeing on? Why is Rabbi Yehuda saying that you can no longer search once the chametz becomes prohibited? And the answer is, he's afraid that if you're searching out chametz, right, you're finding pieces of cake or bread or other kinds of leavened products in your home after, let me make an adjustment here. Yeah. After the chametz has become prohibited to you, well, let's say you find some and then it's in your hand, and then you're searching for more in order to remove it and burn it and destroy it. But in the meantime, it's in your hand and you might have a lapse of awareness and just eat it, because a man with cake in his hand, even though he's got the cake in his hand in order to take it outside and burn it so he shouldn't be in possession of it during Passover, he might momentarily forget and eat the cake, right? And so if the chametz hasn't become prohibited yet, okay, so he ate it. It doesn't matter. He hasn't done anything wrong. But once it becomes prohibited, so then he's guilty of a transgression. So Rabbi Yehuda is trying to protect the person from coming to eat the chametz when it is prohibited. So he says the time for searching is only when the chametz is permitted for us to own and eat. The rabbis are saying, well, we're not concerned. We're not concerned that this person who's searching for chametz and he finds some, that he might come to eat it if it's during the time that chametz is prohibited. So that is the difference between them. But so the philosophy seems to be that Rabbi Yehuda is more stringent because people are more likely to come to make a mistake and eat something when it's close to them and it's something that they're not going to be distant, that they don't distance themselves from it. They don't distance themselves, so he's going to provide a decree to distance them. That seems to be what's going on here. But then the Gemara says, well, wait a minute. If that's the sort of underlying philosophy that Rabbi Yehuda is more stringent than the other rabbis when it comes to things that we might come to transgress because we don't distance ourselves from the object in question, in this case the chametz, that might seem to contradict a different teaching. So we have another Mishnah. It comes in Tractate Menachos, which we're going to study much later, God willing, in our journey through the Talmud. It's kind of in the last quarter of the 7.5-year journey. And this has to do with the Omer offering. Now, the Omer offering is quite related to Passover. And so I played that song about Lag BaOmer, about the 33rd day of the Omer. We start counting the Omer on the second day of the festival, right? The second day begins on the second night of Passover. Outside of Israel, that's still the actual festival of Passover. That's why we have a first Seder and a second Seder. But in the land of Israel, there's only one Seder, the first night. And the second night, we're already beginning the intermediate days of Passover. And on that second day, in ancient Israel, when the temple was standing, they would bring the Omer offering. So this was an offering of the first grain, right? The new grain of the year, right? So it's an agricultural society. The people who are growing barley, wheat, oats, etc., the first, sort of ripened grain that gets harvested, the early grain, this is a spring holiday, more grain is going to perhaps grow during the summer, but the new grain is going to be prohibited. This is a Torah prohibition. We can't eat the new grain until some of it, the Omer offering, is brought in the temple, kind of on behalf of the whole people. And after the Omer offering is brought on the second day of Passover, then people can start to eat from the new grain. Now you might think, well, are they eating grain during Passover? How could they be eating grain during Passover? And the answer is, well, matzah is made out of grain. It's just unleavened, right? So you can start eating the new grain once the Omer offering is brought in the temple, when the temple is standing. Now, what this ruling is about is that as soon as the Omer offering was brought on the second day of Passover, immediately in the market, and so this is on the second day, right? The second full day. So we have the Seder the first night. The next day we're in synagogue praying. Then there's the second night in Israel. Already it's not the festival. We can do work. We're back to work. And then the next day, the second full day, in the markets, in the morning they're bringing that Omer offering in the temple, and then immediately in the markets of Jerusalem, the new grain is available in the form of fresh flour and roasted grain. Now, they just brought the Omer offering that morning, and immediately flour and roasted grain are available in the markets. That tells you that people were harvesting the grain, grinding the grain, and roasting the grain before the Omer offering had been brought, right? So they were doing the steps of sort of harvesting and processing before the Omer offering had been brought. It's not saying that they were eating it, but they were harvesting and processing. So Rabbi Meir says that the people who were conducting themselves in this way, harvesting and processing the grain, the new grain, before the Omer was brought in the temple, were acting in a way that contradicts the will of the sages. In other words, they were transgressing the will of the sages. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, they're not. That what they're doing is in accord with the will of the sages. So what is Rabbi Meir, on behalf of the rest of the rabbis, disagreeing with Rabbi Yehuda. Well, actually, they're both expressing what is the halacha, what is the law on behalf of all the other sages, but they're disagreeing completely on what the other sages are saying, are decreeing. So Rabbi Meir says they should not be harvesting and processing. Why? Because they might come to eat some of that grain before it's permitted. You can't eat of the new grain until the Omer offering is brought in the temple. And Rabbi Yehuda is saying we're not concerned about that because people are going to distance themselves from eating the new grain. They know you're not supposed to eat the new grain. So even though they're harvesting and processing it, they're not going to come to eat it. And furthermore, the way that they distance themselves, not only sort of conceptually, I'm not supposed to eat the new grain, but also, well, when they harvest it, and this is according to Rava. Rava said, yeah, furthermore, they're not going to eat it because when they harvest it in an atypical manner. They pick the grains by hand rather than with tools. And when they grind it, they don't grind it in the big, grindstone, mills with huge grindstones. They actually use hand mills. And when they roast it, they do that in an atypical manner. So just to get some of this grain available in the markets as soon as the Omer offering has been brought, they are harvesting and processing, but they're doing it in an atypical manner to remind themselves that they can't eat it. But says Abaye, come on, that doesn't wash. That doesn't pass the smell test. Because some of the grain is really early. It's early grain. Because it's grown in irrigated fields and in valleys, right? So it's where it's easier to grow the grain. So that grain is going to be ready earlier, right? It's going to be ready in Israel in February and early March. And it's not that they harvested it in an atypical manner. They harvested it. They did a regular harvest. And there was so much of it that they didn't grind it by hand. They ground it the way they normally do. And they did everything in the normal way, at least with respect to this early grain. And some of that is being reflected in the markets here. So it's not because they're harvesting and processing in an atypical manner that we're not concerned that people won't come to eat it. The reason that we're not concerned that these people will eat grain that they're not supposed to eat until the Omer offering is brought, says Abaye, is because they know that they're not supposed to eat new grain, and it's new grain, right? Like everything about it is new. You only deal with new grain at this time of the year. Everyone knows there's a prohibition on eating new grain. So it's not like, there's always new grain around and only at this time of the year can you not eat it. The new grain is only available at this time of year, and they know they're not supposed to eat it, and that's why the rabbis are not concerned that they'll come to eat it, per the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So his distinction makes sense. With respect to chametz, right, which Rabbi Yehuda says you can only search for chametz when it is permitted to eat and not when it's prohibited, that's because we eat chametz all year long. All year long we eat bread. All year long we eat cake. And it's only when Passover is coming in that it suddenly becomes prohibited. So when they're doing that search of the chametz in the house, right, they know they're searching for the chametz in order to burn it. They know they're not going to be allowed to eat it once the afternoon of the 14th comes in and then Passover begins that night. But they're just so accustomed to eating bread and cake and stuff that now that they're searching for it and they have some in their hand and then they get distracted and somebody yells at them and somebody says hello and somebody comes over and somebody walks by and then there's a cake in his hand and he just eats it without thinking. And that's what Rabbi Yehuda is trying to protect him from doing. So Abaye says, okay, so Rabbi Yehuda's position really makes sense. But Rava says, well, wait a minute. If Rabbi Yehuda's position makes so much sense, then why did the rabbis decree against harvesting and processing before the Omer, at least according to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, but not against searching for chametz after the chametz has become prohibited? So Rava is saying, well, the rabbis say we can search for chametz after it's become prohibited, but we shouldn't be dealing with new grain before the Omer offering has been brought. Why? Because one will not make this error of eating chametz that happens to be in his hand because he got distracted. Because what's he doing when he's searching for it? He's searching for it in order to burn it, right? He's searching for it in order to burn it. That's going to be pretty present in his mind. He doesn't need that extra decree on him that he's not allowed to search once the chametz has become prohibited. On the other hand, the people who are harvesting and processing the new grain in order to sell it in the marketplace, they're not doing that in order to burn the new grain. They're doing that in order to eat it, or to make it edible for others so they can eat it. They're in the process of making the grain edible. So it might well happen that when you're in the process of making this thing edible, you might say to yourself, have I roasted this thing enough? Tasted, yeah, it's roasted enough. Oops, I just ate of the new grain. So the rabbis were protecting them because they're in the process of making something edible, and they might need that extra protection, at least according to the view of Rabbi Meir. Rav Ashi tries to stick up for Rabbi Yehuda's view of this by saying, well, wait a minute, come on. This new grain that they're grinding into flour and even roasted to make roasted grain, you don't eat that. It's going to require further preparation before it becomes food. But they say, no, Rav Ashi's wrong. They dismiss his defense of Rabbi Yehuda because, well, before it becomes flour and before it becomes roasted grain, it's just kernels on the stalk. And I guess wheat kernels, when you, barley kernels, when you first harvest it, you could eat it just in its raw state. I've never had raw wheat. Can you really eat that? But I guess maybe when it's just picked and it's fully ripe, you could eat it. You could taste it. You could taste it to see if it's, fully ripe or something. And it is edible, more so than when it's just flour or roasted grain. So Rav Ashi's defense of Rabbi Yehuda doesn't work there. So, are we to understand that Rabbi Yehuda's philosophy about protecting people in some cases but not in others is basically based like this? Where people distance themselves from a particular object, when they naturally have a sense of caution about the thing that they're handling, so then Rabbi Yehuda says we don't have to decree against that. But, like the new grain, but where it's something they're accustomed to have in their hands and they don't have this natural tendency to distance themselves from it, like bread and cake in our homes, there Rabbi Yehuda will make a decree to protect them from coming to, in a lapse of awareness, eat something that they shouldn't have eaten. Is that the basis of Rabbi Yehuda's philosophy about this? And then the Gemara says, well, apparently not, because we have another situation that has to do with the law of Shabbos. So on Shabbos, right before Shabbos begins, well, in modern times, we light candles. It's not a Shabbos candle. This is just my wisdom candle, right? But Nina and our daughter, on Friday afternoon before Shabbos begins, they light candles. Jewish women light candles before Shabbos begins. Why? We've done this for thousands of years. It originally began because you can't kindle fire once Shabbos starts, and you don't want to sit in the dark. In ancient times, right, they didn't have a light switch. They didn't have that kind of light. If you're going to have light, it has to be a lamp that's burning, a wick in a lamp, right? Now, they didn't have candles either so much. What they had was an oil lamp. There was a wick, in like a genie lamp, right? That's where we see this in modern times in movies, like in Aladdin from Disney, right? You see the lamp of the genie. That's a lamp, right? Because it's an oil container with a long spout where the wick would be. And then just like oil lamps now, and then you light the wick. So there's a flame there. That's going to provide light. How long will the wick burn? As long as there's oil in the lamp that is feeding the flame in the wick. When you run out of oil, so the light is going to sputter and go out. Well, let's say it's the winter time when it gets dark really early, and your lamp is about this big, and even if you fill it with oil, 4 hours later, you're still up, you want to be singing songs around the table, you don't want all the lights to burn out. But your lamp does not hold enough oil to burn for 5 hours. It's going to go out after 4 hours. So what do? So one solution to that is that you could put an extra container sort of next to or alongside your lamp with more oil. And that container will kind of drip oil into your oil lamp. So like you're adding to its oil capacity. And you could do that actually with an eggshell that has a hole in it, or some kind of a vessel, a clay vessel, a tube, that's going to essentially enlarge your oil reservoir in your lamp. Now, the rabbis prohibit this. They say you can't do that. Why? Because now you've got a container with some extra oil in it. The lamp is closed. This container is open. Oil is dripping into it so that the lamp is going to burn longer. But now you've got like this container of oil maybe right on your dinner table. And maybe somebody, wants a little oil, and it's not handy on the table right now, but he wants to dip his bread in some oil, or he wants a little bit of oil for his salad dressing, something like that. And he might just take a spoonful of oil out of that container that's feeding the lamp. If you remove oil that you had already allotted to the lamp, it's a problem, because now that lamp is going to go out earlier than it would have otherwise. And that is considered extinguishing a flame. Right? You can't kindle a flame on Shabbos, and you can't extinguish a flame. And if you cause a flame to go out earlier, you can do this before Shabbos began. You can decide how much oil you want there. But after Shabbos began, the oil that was already kind of in the flow to feed the wick for the Shabbos lamp, if you take some of that oil out, you're causing it to be extinguished early, and the sages prohibit that. Rabbi Yehuda permits, not that you take the oil out, but he permits you to have this tube with the extra oil, because he says, you know what? The people know that they're not supposed to use that oil. That oil is assigned to the Shabbos lamp. They're not going to use that oil for their salad dressing or for the bit of their bread. That oil is for the lamp. It's the extra reservoir of the lamp. But people know better. People know that the stringencies of Shabbos are great. We spent 250 days studying the laws of Shabbos and Eruvin, which are further laws of Shabbos. So people know that the laws of Shabbos are stringent, and they won't use that oil to eat it. Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned about that. The other rabbis who dispute him are. So it would seem that oil, which is a pretty commonplace thing that we don't distance ourselves from, we use oil in our lives, similar to chametz, leaven products, bread, cake, etc. So it would seem that Rabbi Yehuda is not issuing a decree, even though it's something that we don't distance ourselves from. He doesn't think we need the extra measure of protection, even though it's a commonplace product for us, similar to the leaven. Says the Gemara, yeah, but this is different. It's different because Shabbos is so extreme. Rabbi Yehuda feels that the people can be relied on not to take the oil because they distance themselves from transgressing Shabbos. It's not that he's here issuing a leniency over something where they don't normally distance themselves. They do distance themselves. So we can't learn out Rabbi Yehuda's philosophy about protecting people when he does and when he doesn't from the case of the oil lamp. Then we have a different case, the case of the Bechor. So a kosher animal, the firstborn male offspring of a kosher animal, right? The first male offspring of, say, a cow or a ewe or a goat or a female goat. Its first male offspring, we can't use it, we don't eat it, we don't work it on the farm. It has, when the temple is standing, it has to be offered as the Bechor offering. Now, it can only be offered on the altar in the temple, when the temple is standing, if it is unblemished. It cannot be a blemished animal. No blemished animal can be brought on the altar as a sacrifice. Let's say that this animal, before it's brought as an offering, right, it's going to be given to the priest for this purpose. And the priest is going to be able to eat some of it. Some of it goes up on the altar. Some of it is eaten by the priest. So it's going to be given to the priest. It has to be unblemished. But before it's brought to the priest, before it's offered in the temple, it's sick, right? This Bechor, this firstborn male kosher offspring, gets sick. It's got a condition, and the medical treatment is a bloodletting, right? So, I mean, they didn't have all the medicines and other medical procedures we have now. one important medical procedure in the medical, pharmacopoeia, as it were, was bloodletting, right, for both humans and animals. So this animal has a condition where if it isn't drained a little bit, just a little bit of blood has to be let out of the animal. And if they don't do that, the animal could die. So the sages, the rabbis say, okay, so you can let blood. You can remove a little blood from the animal just to preserve it so that it will still be a bechor. You have to be very careful that when you let blood, you don't do so in a location like the animal's lip where it will create a permanent blemish that would then cause it to be unsuitable to be brought as a sacrifice or given to the priest for the offering of the firstborn, the bechor offering. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, we don't let him let blood, even though the animal might die, because if we do allow that, he's agitated. He's worried that this thing will be ruined. There might be a loss. It was allotted to the priest. Now he may have to go find another animal to replace the one that was blemished. So in his agitated state, when he goes to let blood, he might make a mistake and do so in such a way that it blemishes the animal and actually ruins it as a bechor offering. Now we could say, well, if he doesn't let blood, it's going to die. He's going to have to replace it anyway. But that's what Rabbi Yehuda says, because it's definitely an avera, a sin, to blemish a firstborn on purpose. That would be a way to get out of giving it to the priest. So lest he come to make that transgression, Rabbi Yehuda says you can't do the medical procedure of a bloodletting on that animal. The other rabbis say yes, you can, because the person will be careful. So it seems like Rabbi Yehuda is consistent in his ruling with the animal here, with the bechor, that a person in an agitated state might come to make a mistake, and a person who forgot to search his home on time for chametz would also be agitated, and he might come to make a mistake or be forgetful and eat the chametz when it is prohibited to him. So we're not quite sure. We've had, contradictory rulings. Is it that Rabbi Yehuda issues a decree when people don't distance themselves naturally from the object in question and they might come to transgress? Or maybe he issues decrees even when they do distance themselves naturally, when they would be careful, like in the case of the bechor. So we're not sure yet. But now we're going to go to the next Mishnah because the sense of when does Rabbi Yehuda issue a stringency and when does he not is actually also going to be the subject of this next Mishnah, even though it's a very different type of analysis that's going to be brought. So let's read Mishnah number 4 here in chapter 1 of Tractate Pesachim. And we're only going to open this discussion, so we're almost at the end. If you have comments or questions, put them in. Mishnah 4. The Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishnah, disagree regarding until what time chametz, leaven, may be eaten and at what time it must be removed on the eve of Passover, right before Passover starts on the night of the 15th. Rabbi Meir says one may eat chametz, leaven, the entire 5th hour of the 14th of Nisan, and one must burn it immediately afterward at the beginning of the 6th hour. Rabbi Yehuda says one may eat the entire 4th hour, and one places it in abeyance during the 5th hour, and then he burns it at the beginning of the 6th hour. So by the way, what is this 3rd, 4th, 5th hour? The way the timekeeping was done, according to the rabbis back then, is that whatever amount of daylight you had, you divide that in 12, right? So, I guess on the equinox, in the first day of spring and the first day of fall, when the day is 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of night, so then the hours are actually 60 minutes long. But in the summer, where there's more daylight than night, then these hours, these rabbinic hours, are longer than 60 minutes, because they're still 1/12 of the amount of daylight. And in the winter, they're less than 60 minutes long because they're still 1/12 of the amount of daylight. So everyone agrees that at the beginning of the 6th hour, that's where you burn the chametz, right? So at that point, you have to burn the chametz. What they're disagreeing on is until when may you eat it? Until when is it permitted to eat the chametz? Rabbi Meir says, well, until the end of the 5th hour. In other words, you're going to burn it at the beginning of the 6th hour. Rabbi Meir says, well, until the end of the 5th hour, you can eat it. Until you're about to burn it, that's when you can eat it. Rabbi Yehuda says he's going to build in this buffer, right? Rabbi Yehuda sort of says people make mistakes, and we're going to issue decrees as a fence around the Torah to keep them from making mistakes. So now, before it was that if they have chametz in their hand, they might come to eat it. Now, they're not quite sure what time it is, right? So we don't want them by mistake to eat chametz thinking that it's still the time of day when it's permitted, when actually that time has passed. So Rabbi Yehuda says we build in an hour buffer where we're not allowed to eat it, but we don't burn it yet. So we cut off the time when it's permitted to eat it 1 hour earlier than Rabbi Meir and the other rabbis. And furthermore, Rabbi Yehuda said, 2 disqualified loaves of thanks offering are placed on the bench in the colonnade in the temple as an indicator. So when the temple was standing, the priests who knew very well what time of day it was, because they had to do everything, quite precisely in the temple. So they would take 2 loaves of a disqualified offering, in other words, bread that had sanctity. It was going to be used in an offering, but then the offering that the bread was going to accompany somehow became disqualified, so the bread couldn't be brought. And they're going to use that bread as a signal to all the people in Jerusalem who are waiting to find out, what time we can no longer eat chametz as Passover is approaching. And they had this spot in the temple that was visible to the crowd. And when they removed that loaf of bread from that high-profile spot, then the buzz would go through the crowd. Hey, they removed the loaf. That's it. No more chametz. No more chametz. And the word would spread very quickly around Jerusalem. And as long as the loaves are placed there, the entire nation continues to eat chametz. When one of the loaves was taken away, the people know that the time had come to place the chametz in abeyance, that for the next hour we don't eat it and we don't burn it, and that hour has arrived. And they either eat nor burn their leaven. And when they were both taken away, right, so they took away the first loaf, we've entered the hour of pause. You don't eat, you don't burn. And when they took the second loaf away, now we burn it, right? And so that was a visual signal to the crowds assembled in Jerusalem who had come there on the pilgrimage for the Passover festival. To finish reading the Mishna, Rabban Gamliel says that the times are divided differently. Non-sacred foods are eaten the entire 4th hour, and teruma may actually be eaten during the entire 5th hour. Since it is a mitzvah to eat teruma, this is holy food set aside for only priests can eat it, and burning it is prohibited. Additional time was allocated for its consumption, and one burns all leaven, including the teruma, at the beginning of the 6th hour. So we'll put aside for a second the question of what we're doing with teruma, but in terms of the chametz and what people can do in the nation of Israel when the temple is standing, it's like Rabbi Yehuda. The halacha, the law, is not according to the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda. It's according to Rabbi Yehuda. So that extra hour where we neither eat nor burn the chametz, built in as a buffer so that people don't come to make a mistake, became the law. And to finish up today's discussion, we'll say that this conflict, right, this dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and the other rabbis on people's sense of time. Here the law went, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that they need that extra hour as a buffer. But when we have witnesses coming to Beis Din, coming to a rabbinic court to testify in a capital case, like there was a murder, right? And here come the witnesses to say that they saw the murderer commit the crime, or maybe they saw the murderer leaving the scene of the crime. But they're testifying in a capital case. So if they say, if one witness says, I saw this murder happen on the 2nd day of the month, and the other witness says, I saw that murder happen on the 3rd day of the month, So did they contradict each other? If they contradict each other, then we can't have a conviction, because if we convict the defendant, he's going to, of murder, he's going to have to be executed, capital punishment for a capital crime. So you can only do that. Now, rabbinic courts were loath to find a guilty verdict in a capital case. They almost never found the murderer guilty because they didn't want to execute and possibly be wrong. So they were almost looking for a reason, to be lenient. And if witnesses contradict each other, then that's enough of a reason you can't convict the murderer. But if the only discrepancy between the testimony of the two witnesses was that one said it happened on the second day of the month and the other said it happened on the third day of the month, so that's not a discrepancy. Because there we say, well, one of them knew that Rosh Chodesh, that month, that remember we've talked about that the months are declared when witnesses see the new moon, bring their testimony to the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, and then the Sanhedrin says, yes, the new moon was sighted, and they declare that the new month has begun. And sometimes the new month began on the 30th day since the last month began, and sometimes the new month began on the 31st day since the last month began. And so that would depend on whether the word had gotten out. And that would depend on the testimony before the Sanhedrin. But not everybody heard that the new month had been declared. Not everybody heard that, especially if this happened, sort of far away from Jerusalem. So one of the witnesses might have been aware that the new month had begun on the early instance, and the other witness might not have been aware. So they saw the same thing, and they saw it at the same time, and they just had a little, one was unaware of the correct date on the calendar, but because he's only off by a day, we can say, oh no, his mistake was just that he didn't know what day it was. It's a normal mistake that people make. However, if one witness said it happened on the second day of the month, and the other witness said it happened on the fourth day of the month, then the testimonies contradict each other, and we would, and the defendant would get off. And then that example of people being unsure of the date is likened to the fact that people are also unsure about the time of day. So if one witness said it happened in the third hour of the day, and the other witness said it happened in the fourth hour of the day, so that's just because people never know exactly what time it is, and that they didn't contradict each other. But if one witness said it happened in the second hour of the day, and the other one said it happened in the fourth hour of the day, then they're 2 hours apart, and people don't make that big a mistake, according to the rabbis. So we would dismiss we would discredit. We don't have two witnesses testifying as to the same crime, the same set of facts about that crime, according to the rabbis. Rabbi Yehuda says people are not so aware of the time of day. I mean, particularly 2,000 years ago when they didn't have watches, right? They didn't have an iPhone, they didn't have a watch on their wrist, they didn't know what time it was exactly. So if their testimony was off by 2 hours, that's just a human mistake. We do not have, according to Rabbi Yehuda, a conflict in these two testimonies because people are unsure of the time. They don't have such a ready awareness of the time of day. And therefore, when we're talking about when they should stop eating the chametz and when they should start burning the chametz on the eve of Passover, we need to build in that hour. And the rabbis are going to agree with him with respect to Passover, that people are unsure, and we're going to protect them from coming to transgress, but they're going to disagree, right? They're going to disagree because they want to protect the court from coming to convict by mistake an innocent man and execute. So they're going to be more stringent on allowing witness testimony when the two witnesses say, their statement of facts was 2 hours apart. They're going to be more stringent than Rabbi Yehuda, even though they might agree with him that people are unsure of the time. They're not going to go so far as to say that we should accept these two witness testimonies that conflict on the time of day by more than 1 hour. That's what I've got for us today. Let us check comments and questions. Bill Eldridge. I've been thinking about that bit of the Noahide covenant. I'm a theologian, right? Bill is, he's in Arkansas now, but I think he's normally a theology student at Berkeley, graduate student. And he says, I do it mostly on reflex. And it seems to me there's a bit of that we don't always consider. The covenant of Noah, of course, dictates that we have to form laws and keep them, right? The seventh of the Noahide commandments is to have a justice system based on proper courts of law. So presumably, says Bill, if you belong to a non-Jewish religion which worships the one creator, then the laws of that religious tradition should be covered in that. Are they not? So yes, as a pious gentle, I only have 7 laws plus the various strictures of my own tradition, right? I can't comment on the laws of your tradition. I don't know them. I haven't studied them. But what I would say is, when we say, well, the Jews have 613 commandments and the non-Jews just have 7, the word just, meaning like only, doesn't belong there. Because the 7 Noahide commandments sound simple, like believe in the one God and don't blaspheme and don't murder and don't steal and don't have sexual immorality, don't tear a limb off a living animal, and establish courts of law. So you can say them quickly, but each one of those is a category of laws and teachings and learnings that can be quite vast. There's tons to study and learn. And this is where we really have a lot to talk about in common. Like the first of the Noahide commandments is to know God, right? To know about God, to connect with God. So how are you going to connect with God? Well, you're going to study what has been learned and taught for thousands of years about the one God. So that's what we're doing here together. So it's like the whole realm of Torah study can come under the auspices of the first Noahide commandment. There's a ton to do. But then I think maybe what you're saying, Bill, is that, well, when you're going to establish courts of law that are just, that's also a vast area of study, and I would think you would demand that a just court system and judges who act in a righteous way, would somehow conform to your ideas of righteousness and justice, and hopefully we can agree what those ideas are. But it's a vast field of study. I agree with you there. Carolyn says, why is blood so important to God? Is it holy in and of itself or just within the context of an offering? We have a teaching, you shall not eat the blood, you shall pour it on the ground, for the blood is the life. I don't have the citation in the Torah, but that's a verse in the Torah. I don't know the chapter and verse. But there's definitely this understanding that the blood represents the life. Right? So for kosher meat to be kosher, one of the things that makes it kosher is that it was slaughtered in a very precise way, super sharp blade, one continuous cut. And then the animal, after it's slaughtered that way, all its blood has to drain out. And then the blood goes on the ground, but we have to cover up the blood. We don't leave it sitting there because that's a kind of an abomination. It's, it's an unholy thing to do because the blood represents the life, and we are going to be so mindful and respectful of life. So when we bring blood to sprinkle it on the altar, to the modern mind, like you're talking about animal sacrifices, blood sacrifices, it's for us it seems yucky, right? But honestly, the reason it's yucky to us is because we are so far removed from the source of our food. Meat to modern women and men is like a cube that comes in a styrofoam package at the supermarket. For most of the history of humanity, meat was an animal that you saw walking around, and then a appointed person either hunted it and killed it or slaughtered it, and then we saw it getting butchered, and then we saw it getting cooked, and often if we lived on a farm, some people in our audience, I'm sure, have had this experience. They were acquainted with the animal while it was alive. They saw it slaughtered. and then they eat it. And the gratitude that goes along with that. I mean, this is a big thing, what Thanksgiving was, right, last week. We're very mindful that animal, God gave us the right to take that animal's life so that we could eat and enjoy it, even though it's not necessary. I mean, we could eat plants and live. We were given, the God-given right to eat meat. But we shouldn't do that lightly, so that when we took the life of an animal in order to eat it, that should come with trepidation, with trembling, and tremendous gratitude. And so the idea that they would bring offerings on the altar and with a very precise procedure, put some of its blood on the horns of the altar and some here and some there, and do a very precise thing. And for certain offerings, blood here, blood there. I mean, and the slaughter itself had to be done so carefully. And still, for kosher meat, is done so carefully. So when you say, why is blood so important to God? It's because life is everything, and the blood represents the life, I would say. Sharon says, we are so much more fastidious, good word, for Pesach and removing chametz and kashrut. Is there actually leniency being accorded here? My understanding is that we need to be more stringent for Pesach. Well, as we see, right, the rabbis were more lenient about the search, but what was their leniency leading to? See, this is what's so often interesting in Talmudic discussion. They were being more lenient that we could search for chametz after the holidays already began and the chametz has become prohibited. But their leniency was meant to enable us to remove chametz from our homes, right? It's a leniency that in a sense creates a stringency or allows us to engage in a more stringent practice. So for sure, there's tremendous stringency around Passover, and indeed they're going to agree with Rabbi Yehuda that, okay, we're going to cut off the eating a little early, lest people make a mistake and come to eat it after the 6th hour of the day has begun, right? So we're not going to allow that to happen. We're going to build in that buffer. And it's just this question that keeps coming up. Tough cases make bad law. So sometimes we want to introduce a stringency to protect people, but that very stringency could lead to a leniency in another situation. And they're always balancing a law, in this realm of endeavor. How is it going to affect that realm of human endeavor? And that's what they're always balancing. And finally, Roxanne Nessis. So great to have you with us, Roxanne. Maybe a good idea to offer face masks with catchy saying like, oy vey, stay away. That's cute. That's cute. Not a bad mask. Please, God, may the time of needing face masks pass soon. May that vaccine be effective and safe and widely distributed as soon as possible, because I gotta tell you, I'm sick of the plague. I'm sick of the pandemic. Aren't you? I mean, the fact that we can't gather the way we normally would in big crowds and singing loud in our synagogues and other places of worship, and that especially that the kids can't go to school. I mean, it's not good for kids to be on Zoom classes all day long, staring into a screen rather than being with their friends. So please, God, may this pandemic pass soon, and we say amen. Have a great night, my holy sisters and brothers, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, to be learning Daf 12 here of Tractate Pesachim. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's our annual campaign. If you appreciate what we do, donate.accidentaltalmudist.org and become our partner in sharing the light of Torah and Jewish wisdom with the world. Good night.